Welcome to Power Parenting, where, as always, it is our goal to connect church and home by equipping parents to be the primary faith trainer in their home.
Hello, everyone. My name is Joe Landi, and I'm joined by my wife, Meghan Landi. And today we are talking about communication, and particularly in your home with your kids. Not that it's like easy between spouses, but we'll focus on the kids today, right?
That's right, yes. And we all know that communication is important. I think we can all agree on that, but sometimes it's hard to make it a priority. Why is it hard to make it a priority in our home? Do you know?
Because it's not easy. Communication is just very, very difficult.
No, because we're busy.
We're very busy.
And sometimes our kids are hormonal.
Not just our kids.
Who are you talking about?
Sometimes ourselves a little bit.
That's right. But it can leave us feeling frustrated about communication in our home.
That's right.
And so we just want to talk about how we can build healthy lines of communication.
Right.
And it's specifically through asking good questions and listening.
Asking good questions and listening. And I love questions.
I know, because
You know that?
we call you the question king. Actually, we call you the question queen because it's
Question
two
queen, 'cause
Q's.
it sounds good.
But for
I get
today,
it. Yes.
you can be the question king.
I like to be the question king.
Okay.
I like questions because they're a quest for discovery. That's part of what's in the word. That's what we do. But you know what? People say there's no such thing as a bad question, but we don't necessarily believe that because there are questions that will lead to and you'll get to this in just a moment, a one-word answer. And then there are questions that lead to thought and provoking and allowing us to get a window into our kids' hearts. And that's what we're after. We want great questions, not just questions. But I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit. Let's talk about the ABCs of questions. How about, what's the A?
Okay, the A is ask with purpose, right? You establish great questions end or result in more than a one-word answer.
Right.
For example, when our son comes home from school, if I ask him, how was your day? I get fine, good.
Our 13-year-old son.
13-year-old son, right. Or I'll get a
grunt. A grunt.
Right.
Sometimes that tells you a lot.
Yeah. And my goal is I want to discover more about his day. I want to discover more about what happened in his day.
Right.
And so I have to shift and I have to be creative in the way that I ask my questions of him. And so, things that we like to do, the ways we get creative in our home is we use kind of these question starters. And so one of them is like, what's it like? What's it like to be a seventh grader in the lunchroom?
Right.
During the day.
Right.
Or asking Riley, what's it like to play on the playground with your friends? What kinds of things do you do? Or tell me about lunch today. Tell me about recess. Tell me about your teacher.
Right.
We also say, in what ways? In what ways did you learn something new today?
Right.
And then one that we really like to use too, kind of as the conversation builds, is how did that make you feel? And sometimes you have to wait on that, right? But it's a good question to help them think through. And so the A is ask with purpose, and I would add creativity.
Ask with purpose and creativity.
Yes.
I love that.
What's the B?
Well, and so like moving out to B, it kind of, while you were talking there just a moment, it does lead into the B, which is be okay with silence. But one of the things I think we need to keep in mind is just the timing of when we ask our kids these questions. Obviously, right when they come home from school, like any of us, when we come home from work possibly or a long day, we're tired, we're exhausted. The last thing we want is a bunch of questions being thrown at us and grilling. So parents, you got to be wise on when you ask these questions and how you ask them. But that kind of leads into the B, be okay with silence. A good question, a great question is going to elicit a thoughtful response, right? If I ask a question, how was your day? Good. There's no thought to that. I can get an immediate response. But if I say, hey, what was the best part of your day? It's okay if your kids take a moment to think, what was my day like? What did I do? And to sit in silence. I work with students. I'm a student pastor, and I hear from students a lot that it feels like their parents are grilling them all the time. And I think a lot of parents are well-intentioned with the questions that they want to ask, and so they'll fire off a bunch of questions, and it just makes their kid feel like, you're grilling me here.
Right.
And so we have to be okay with silence, and I think silence does a couple of things. Number one, it allows our kids to think through, what is my answer? What am I really saying? But two, you mentioned it earlier about listening. As a parent, I want to be able to listen what my kid is saying and not saying. And it allows me to be prayerful too while I'm waiting for a response. I'm often praying. I had a mentor teach me this years ago. Be praying, Lord, how are you discipling my child right now? while they're thinking of the response. So being okay with silence is huge. I don't know. Would you add anything to that?
Well, and I think sometimes we think silence is a little bit disrespectful, like they don't want to answer our question. But we have to remember, like their brains are processing, and we need time to process. And so you kind of already touched on that. I think it's important. And then, speaking of mentors, there's a girl that I used to mentor. She was a teenager at the time, and I remember we would sit across the table. And we would go out, and I would think that I need to like draw her out, and so I'd ask some questions, and she just couldn't hardly speak and give me any answers. And she was going through a lot at the time, but later, several years later, she came back to us, and she told me, "Thank you for sitting with me in the silence. Like I could not even form a thought to talk sometimes." Yes. And so I'm always reminded, like, okay, it's okay for us to allow our kids to be quiet, and maybe that's like later, like later in the day they'll answer. We talked about something earlier in a video called correction versus connection, and like at bedtime, maybe it's at bedtime when you start asking questions. So understanding the rhythms in that too, there's more resources on that. But
so ask with purpose, be okay with silence, and the C is the last thing.
Continue the conversation.
Continue the conversation.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And so that kind of leads, part of that is being okay with either talking later or just knowing how to draw your kid out. Right. And I think it kind of depends on your kid. So you have to know your child well. But also, good things that we say or like to use is tell me more. Tell me more about that. Right. Or with our daughter, Riley, she's 6, and there's things that she says that I don't always understand what she's trying to say. Sure. She doesn't always know how to articulate it or communicate it. Right. And I have to say, help me understand that. Can you say it in a different way so that I understand? And so I think, a part of healthy communication is for them to know we want to understand them, and we may not always understand them, but it's good that we can draw them out and have some tools, practical tools to draw them out. And so that's a part of continuing the conversation, right? And that goes for serious conversations, that goes for light conversations. Like we just want to confirm our love and our support and our encouragement of our kids, and that has worked well. We haven't been perfect,
of course,
but it's worked really well. And one thing that you always are good at is when our kids are like, "Can I tell you something? Can I ask you a question?" What do you say?
Always.
Right?
Always. You can tell me.
Always come to us.
Thank you for telling me I was good at something.
You're so good at.
I appreciate that.
What are some questions? You need some validation.
Yes, I know.
What are some questions that you use with our kids?
We touched on some of them. Tell me about the best part of your day. Tell me about who was someone that made you laugh and why. Or I always come back to the big 3. I had another mentor of mine. What was the big 3? How do you know I love you? Asking your kids regularly, how do you know I love you? What's your biggest struggle? And how can I be praying for you? Now, we don't ask those every single night like a rope machine or whatnot. We kind of like sprinkle them in every now and then. But you know what? I may ask Logan or Riley, like, hey, what's your biggest struggle right now? And 99 times they'll say, nothing, I'm good, fine. But the 100th time, if I'm trying to continue the conversation, if I'm trying to ask great questions, something may pop up, and they may finally have the courage or the remembrance to say, and they'll open up, and then that will open up great conversation. So I like the asking with purpose, be okay with silence, continuing the conversation, because to me, nothing is more important than keeping lines of communication open with our kids. So
it's good.
Huge.
And down the road, it really opens up for some some tough battles that your kids might face, and you want them to be able to come to you. And so we've seen that already.
Run to us, not away from us.
Right. Yeah.
It's huge.
Well, this was fun.
I know.
Thanks
Thank
for
you.
doing it.
I appreciate you.
And on behalf of our Empowered Homes team, I want to thank you for being with us as we get to walk with you in this parenting journey. We're parents ourselves. We're doing this thing. And so we want to strive to equip you and equip each other. And we're so excited to do that one home at a time.